Thank you very much indeed, Fiona, and a big thank you to David and to Fife Council for hosting us here today and for making us so welcome in the time we've been here. Can I particularly, though, take the opportunity to thank Bill Baxter High School for hosting our Cabinet meeting earlier this afternoon and for hosting tonight's public discussion. I have to say, I think a special thank you is merited to the school and particularly to the pupils, the senior pupils of the school who put on their school uniform and came into school during the school holidays to welcome us here today. I think that was above and beyond the call of duty. So to the staff and to the students of the school, thank you very much indeed for making us so welcome and for making the day go so smoothly for us. As you've just heard from Fiona, this practice of getting out and about and taking the Cabinet to different airts and parts of the country is one of the ways that we're trying to meet a pledge that I made when I became First Minister, and that pledge was to do everything possible to be the most open and accessible government ever in Scotland and perhaps ever anywhere in the world. That's a big ambition, but it's one that I think it's important to try to live up to. And so it follows that the main purpose of tonight's event is not for you to listen to us, although you'll have to do a wee bit of that before we get into the question and answer, but that's not the main purpose. The main purpose of tonight is for us to listen to you. The main purpose of this event is for you to ask us questions. And I want to stress at the outset that you can ask absolutely anything you want to ask. We don't screen or vet questions in advance, no matter how much sometimes we wish we could. But we don't do that. You can ask about any subject you want, and we will do our best tonight to answer your questions as fully, as openly, and as frankly as we possibly can. You might not always like the answers, but they will be honest and open answers. If your question is particularly specific or detailed, we might not be able to give you a full answer tonight, in which case we'll get back to you. And indeed, there might be some people whose questions are of a personal nature, and you might not want to ask it in front of everybody here. If that's the case, there are forms that I think have been put on everybody's seat. If there's a question you would rather feed in privately, or if you don't get the chance to ask your question in open session, please note it down and give it to us, and we'll get an answer to you as quickly as we can. But the key point to stress to you tonight is this is your opportunity to put us on the spot. So don't hold back. I don't feel you have to spare our feelings in any way, not that I would imagine you would. Ask whatever it is that is on your mind, whatever it is that might have brought you here tonight. Now, I'm pretty sure if past experience of these events is anything to go by, we will cover quite a broad range of topics tonight. So I won't try to preempt what they might be by covering every topic under the sun. But just for a few minutes before we get into the questions, I wanted to take the opportunity to set out where we are coming from as a government and what our priorities are as we seek to move Scotland forward in what we hope is the right direction. We published just before the end of last year, just after I became First Minister, our programme for government for the year ahead. And in that programme for government, we set out 3 top-level priorities. We want to create a Scotland that is fairer and more prosperous, and we believe that these two go very much hand in hand. A fairer society helps us to create a more prosperous country, and we also want to do that in reverse, because the more prosperous our country is, the more money and resources we have to build a fairer society. And the third priority is to seek to enable people like you and people right across the country to participate more fully and more meaningfully in the decisions that affect your day-to-day lives. We don't always have all of the answers in government. I know we're meant to, and I know sometimes we pretend that we do, but no government does. And the more people across the country can get involved in the decision-making and influence that decision-making, the better, in my view, those decisions will be. So I want to illustrate tonight those 3 themes: fairness, prosperity and participation, by talking about some of the things that the ministers here today have been doing over the course of the day. Because, of course, the ability to go out and about and meet local individuals and local organisations is actually one of the big benefits of holding these cabinets outside of Edinburgh, because we get to talk to people and see things and experience things that we wouldn't get to do if we spent all of our time in Edinburgh. And between me and the other ministers here today, we've undertaken 18 different visits and meetings across the area today. Earlier this afternoon, I I had the opportunity to start the construction, formally kick off the construction for the new intensive psychiatric care unit, which is being built at Stratheden Hospital. That new unit is going to provide rooms and treatment facilities for people who need mental health care. It's part of a £2 billion investment we're making in the 3 years up to March next year in new hospitals and equipment in the NHS. It's also, I hope, a demonstration of our commitment to good quality mental health services in Scotland. You could argue that mental health has been, over the years, overlooked or even stigmatised a bit too readily. But it's a priority for us as a government. Over the next 5 years, we'll be investing an additional £100 million in mental health services across the country. And we are committed to ensuring that mental health has the same status as any other health condition. It should be treated as seriously and treated as effectively. And the level of investment we're putting into new health facilities shows something else as well. It shows that even in a really tough spending climate, when money is tight, as it has been for the past few years and will continue to be for the few years ahead of us, we're determined to protect the public services that people most rely on. And the NHS is always, of course, top of that list. Another example, though, is services for our young people. After I was at Stratheden this afternoon, I visited with Fiona the youth cafe here in Cupar. It's run by the YMCA and the YWCA with support from the Scottish Government. I was able to chat with a number of young people there about their plans for their holidays and their plans for their future. I think there's an important context to this just now, because in 2 days' time, the UK Government will publish its budget, its second budget of the year. It did one just before the general election and it's now doing another one afterwards. And one change that we could see on Wednesday in that budget is the removal of housing benefit from 18 to 21-year-olds who are unemployed or claiming job seekers allowance. That move could affect nearly 20,000 young people across the UK. And I guess the government at UK level thinks young people are an easy target. But the young people that will be affected by that change, if it is announced in the budget on Wednesday, aren't on the whole people who've chosen to leave home. They're not people who want to leave home. They might be people who are leaving care, so they've got no home to return to, or young people who are fleeing domestic violence, or individuals who've travelled to find work in other parts of the country, but they're not earning enough to pay rent on a property. And when these people claim housing benefit, they're not necessarily making a lifestyle choice. They're actually reaching for a lifeline that allows them to live independently. Now, the UK Government says they want to remove that benefit to save money. In actual fact, I suspect it will end up costing money because more young people, and there will be people in the 18 to 21-year-old age group who have children and are supporting families, if they don't have access to housing benefit and if they don't have parents or a home that they can return to, they'll end up homeless. And so the money that is that cost will end up outweighing or nearly outweighing the money that is saved. And that's, of course, before you consider the longer-term losses to people's ability to earn a wage and to contribute to the economy. And I think it's one example of many of how the politics and economics of austerity doesn't just cause harm to our society, although it has, but also weakens the economy. If you make people less able to work, then you make them less able to contribute to the economy. And of course, if we have austerity holding back economic growth, we make it harder to pay down the deficit. That's why the Scottish Government has opted for a different approach. We are trying to reduce the impact of austerity on individuals, and as part of that, we are determined to promote opportunities for young people, to ensure better education leading to better job opportunities, so that we don't see young people as a burden on our society, but as people, if properly supported, can contribute and give back to our economy. That, of course, starts with childcare and education. By the end of the next Parliament, we intend that all 3- and 4-year-olds will have an entitlement to funded childcare of the same number of hours as children of older age groups spend in primary school. We're also making significant investment in new school buildings and working to close the attainment gap in education to ensure that young people who grow up in our more deprived areas have the same chances and the same opportunities to succeed as those from more prosperous parts of the country. We're protecting something called the Educational Maintenance Allowance, enabling young people who come from poorer backgrounds to stay on at school and to further their education. We've made and continue to make big investments in our college estate, and of course we are determined to protect that principle of free education. I had the benefit, as many in this room will have had, of free access to university. I don't want to take that right away from anybody else who's growing up in the years to come. We're also working hard to secure skilled employment opportunities, and we're seeing huge success around this. Youth employment is right now at its lowest rate in 6 years. It's still too high, though, at 14%, but we've got one of the best rates in the European Union. We're outperforming other parts of the UK. We've got higher youth employment, lower unemployment, and lower economic inactivity than other parts of the UK. So that's a record that we're proud of, but one that we're determined to build on. And to build on that success, of course, we've got to take the long-term steps to make our economy more competitive. In doing that, we work very closely with businesses because we understand that business success underpins the prosperity of every community in every single part of the country. Here in Fife, for example, Scottish Enterprise, our economic development agency, helped 120 different businesses last year. Business Gateway helped more than 500 companies start up, and there are in the region of 6,000 business premises in Fife which benefit from our small business bonus, mean that they pay lower business rates or no business rates at all, giving them an advantage when it comes to setting up and sustaining businesses and employing people. Our economic strategy is also developed in close consultation with businesses, focusing very much on what we call the 4 I's that underpin economic success: investment in infrastructure, innovation, internationalisation, exporting more to other countries, and inclusive growth, making sure that as our economy grows, everybody benefits from that. It's not just a few at the top end who do so. So we're investing in skills and infrastructure, the new Queensferry crossing, for example, the extension of broadband that you've seen in Cupar and across Fife in the last 18 months, and continuing to help businesses grow and export. And finally, on that point of inclusive growth, what that means in practice is encouraging businesses to have good employment practices, to pay the living wage, to promote gender equality, and to adopt other progressive employment practices, because we strongly believe that supporting those kinds of policies are good for employees, they're good for society as a whole, but they're also good for the economy at large. It makes individual companies more competitive, but it also makes them more productive, and that's good for all of us. And that approach to growth, one where we work in partnership with businesses and support skills, infrastructure, innovation, exports, is especially important when parts of the countries face difficulties. And that's relevant to one of the other meetings from today that I wanted to mention, and I heard David refer to this in his introduction. John Swinney co-chaired a meeting of the Fife Task Force earlier today with David. That task force, of course, was set up by the Scottish Government and the Council following the redundancies announced by Tullis Russell earlier this year. And it's seeking to provide immediate help and support for those who've been made redundant, and some significant sums of money have been allocated to help specifically with that. And the task force is also about promoting economic development here in Central Fife, and £2 million has been allocated to help companies in Fife seize opportunities to expand into new markets. Some of these companies are companies that previously would have been part of Tullis Russell's supply chain. And we've also set aside more than £2 million for business infrastructure, looking, for example, at possible future uses of the Tullis Russell site. And, you know, that's important because we know good infrastructure makes a difference to businesses looking to set up. And I think the Fife Task Force is a good example of some of these principles and policies that I've been talking about being put into practice, particularly when an area is hit by a sudden loss of jobs, such as came with Tullis Russell. One final point I want to make just before I finish. I started off talking about my visit to the youth cafe. And of course, one of the things about that was quite a few of the young people that I spoke to today had a vote in the referendum last year, because we lowered the voting age to 16. And we've done the same for the Scottish Parliament election that will take place next year. And that's relevant to that theme of participation I talked about. I've already talked about prosperity and fairness. The point I want to end on is participation. The experience of lowering the voting age in the referendum last year was fantastic because it made, as the referendum generally did, people think much more about politics and about how we're governed and about the big decisions that affect their lives. And it's very much that sentiment, that engagement that we now want to harness going forward, taking that engagement that people, I think in the main, enjoyed during the referendum campaign and applying that to the decisions that affect our everyday lives. There's no reason at all why that sense of involvement that people had last year should only be for that big decision that we had to take then. We want that to become the way in which people involve themselves in decisions all the time. Now, we've taken some particular legislative steps to encourage greater engagement. A new law that recently passed called the Community Empowerment Bill is seeking to make it easier for people to do that. But we want that to run through our entire approach to government, which brings me back to exactly where I started, which is this event here tonight. This is just one of many ways in which we want to bring the whole process of government and decision-making much closer to people and much closer to the communities in which you live. And that is the whole reason for us being here tonight. So I'm going to end it there. I hope I've given you a flavour of what the government's about, of what we're trying to do. But what we are trying to do will be greatly influenced by what we hear from you tonight. So as I said earlier on, don't hold back, ask what you want, and we'll now get into what I hope is a good, vibrant, and at least for this lot, if not for me, challenging set of questions. Thank you very much indeed.